You know that feeling, like when you're driving down an empty highway late at night?
Oh, yeah. Best feeling in the world.
Right. The windows are down, the wind is just like roaring in your ears, and you're watching those white dashed lines on the asphalt just blurring past you.
It's very visceral.
Exactly. There is this absolute, undeniable physical certainty of speed. I mean, you are moving forward, you're displacing the air around you, and the world is just rushing backward.
Right. It's arguably one of the most intuitive, unquestionable experiences we have as humans. I mean, our entire perception of reality, our biology, our engineering it is all built on that exact visceral feeling of physical motion.
But then you encounter a framework that takes that certainty, that undeniable feeling of wind and speed, and just it completely dismantles it.
Yeah, completely tears it down.
And we're not just talking about motion here. We are talking about stripping away time, gravity, and like the very particles that make up the steering wheel in your hands. So, welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission today is to fundamentally recalibrate how you, the listener, perceive reality itself.
Yeah, and we're doing that by exploring this truly radical, high-level investigative framework known as UED, or Universal Energy Dynamics.
Right.
This whole ecosystem of thought comes from Sandeep J. Chavan's theory of everything, his specific research on UED, and his really fascinating manifesto on life.
Yeah, and we have a stack of sources here today that don't just gently tweak the edges of modern physics. They completely tear down 400 years of scientific assumptions.
Right.
From like Newton's apple falling from a tree to Einstein's curved space-time.
All of it.
All of it. And we really want to set the tone right out of the gate here. This is an intellectual, clarifying, and frankly revolutionary deep dive.
That is a crucial point to highlight, actually, because UED is not some vague spiritual belief. It's not like mystical philosophy or anything.
Right. It's not a crystal healing seminar.
Exactly. Chavan presents this as a rigorous physics-grade vase for a completely new era of human understanding. I mean, it provides mechanical explanations for things we normally just write off as abstract.
So let's just start with the biggest shock to the system, like the core inversion of how we see the universe. Basically, everything you have been taught about moving through empty space is an illusion.
Right.
The premise is this: you are not moving through the universe. The universe is rippling through you. Because according to this framework, the universe is entirely absolutely still.
Yeah, exactly. In classical physics, we imagine space as this vast empty container, right? Where planets and people and atoms just kind of move around inside it.
Like marbles in a jar.
Right, marbles in a jar.
Yeah.
But in UED, there is no empty space, literally none. Instead, the universe is filled with what Chavan calls SVE.
Okay, SVE, which stands for?
That stands for structured vacuum energy.
Structured vacuum energy. So instead of a void, it's more like a fabric.
Yes. Yep. Imagine SVE as this omnipresent, perfectly still, tension-neutral canvas. It's a highly structured field that just exists everywhere simultaneously. And the most foundational reality-breaking concept of UED is that within this SVE, nothing ever actually moves.
Which is wild to think about.
Right. Not a planet, not a car, not a single atom actually moves from point A to point B.
Okay, which naturally leads us to Chavan's law of ripple consequence. Because obviously, if nothing moves, what exactly is happening when I, walk across the room to get a glass of water?
Right, so what we call motion is just consequence aligning across the SV field. The perfect stillness of the field is disturbed, which creates tension. And then that tension basically propagates to resolve itself.
Okay, I think we need the stadium analogy here.
Yeah, the sources use this really great analogy of a stadium wave. So think of a massive sports stadium where the crowd decides to do the wave.
Yep.
From across the stadium, it looks like this single solid entity moving rapidly sideways across the bleachers.
Yeah, you can track the wave's speed, you can see its momentum, you can basically predict exactly when it's going to hit the next section of seats.
Exactly. But if you zoom in on any individual person in that crowd, no one is actually running sideways.
Oh, right.
They're just standing up and sitting down. They remain in their exact location, simply changing their state of tension. So their vertical posture in a sequenced alignment with their neighbors. The motion of the wave horizontally is purely a perceptual illusion created by sequential resolution.
Okay, I hear the stadium wave analogy, and conceptually, I mean, it makes total sense, but it kind of falls apart for me physically.
How so?
Well, if I'm sitting on a high-speed bullet train, right? My coffee sloshes in the cup. I am literally pushed back into my seat by inertia when the train accelerates. I feel the physical displacement, mass reacting to force. A stadium rev doesn't really explain that physical pressure.
Yeah, and it feels incredibly counterintuitive because your brain actually evolved to survive in that illusion.
Okay.
But in the UED framework, the inertia you feel isn't from being shoved through an empty void.
Hmm.
Your local SVE field is simply realigning its tension state. You're traveling through what they call a consequence map. Every atom in your body, the coffee in your cup, the train itself, they are all just localized nodes in the SVE field rapidly shifting their tension.
Okay, wait. So it is more like a digital screen. Like if I am watching a video of a car driving across a computer monitor, the car isn't actually moving across the plastic of the screen.
Exactly.
The individual pixels are just updating their color and brightness in a perfectly timed sequence.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the pixels don't move, they just change state. The SVE field around you
Yeah.
is rapidly updating its tension profile. So the inertia pushing you into your seat is actually just the structural resistance of the field processing that massive shift in tension. Your brain basically stitches those consecutive localized tension resolutions together and tells you, hey, we're moving.
So wait, if motion is just sequential tension resolution, that fundamentally breaks time.
Oh, completely.
Because time, as we understand it, is really just how we measure motion, right? Like the Earth moving around the sun. If motion is fake, then the fundamental building blocks we use to map reality, time, gravity, the actual physical particles making up my body, they must also be illusions.
They are. Once you accept the still universe, the entire foundation of physics basically has to be rewritten. So let's look at time. In this framework, time is redefined as resolution duration.
Resolution duration, meaning it's just like a buffering speed.
Exactly like buffering. It is not a flowing river. It is not this fourth dimension that you can somehow travel backward or forward through. Time is simply the scorecard of delay.
Scorecard of delay. I like that.
Right. It's the gap between a ripple's cause, a tension forming in the SVE, and its perceived consequence. The field requires a certain amount of processing power, basically, to realign its tension from one node to the next. And we perceive that systemic delay as time passing. If the SVE could resolve tension instantly with zero delay, everything in the universe would happen simultaneously.
That makes incredible sense. It really removes the sort of magic of time and turns it into this mechanical processing metric. So what happens to gravity then? If I drop a pen and it falls to the floor, it's not space-time curving.
No, gravity is redefined as a ripple gradient. It is not a magical, invisible rope pulling two objects together. It is simply a path of least resistance within the SVE.
Okay.
The SVE field naturally has gradients of tension, and consequence always flows down those gradients to resolve itself.
So it's like water finding the easiest path down a hill, but the hill is literally made of structural tension.
Precisely. The pen doesn't fall. The localized tension that makes up the pen is simply cascading down the steepest available gradient in the field toward the massive tension cluster we call the Earth.
Which brings up matter itself. The pen, right? Quarks, electrons, all the hard stuff. If the universe is just a perfectly still canvas, where do solid objects even come from?
Well, in UED, particles are not solid objects at all. They are localized, dense ripple memory.
Dense ripple memory.
Yeah, they are literal knots of tension within the SVE that have stabilized. They are not tiny billiard balls bouncing around in a void. They're highly complex configurations of the field holding a specific persistent tension pattern.
So if a particle isn't a solid thing, that fundamentally changes how I understand light too. Because the sources spend a significant amount of time dismantling what they call the photon fallacy.
Yes, this is a big one.
Like if a photon isn't a tiny bolt of light traveling from the sun to my eye, what is it? And more importantly, why does light seem to have a strict speed limit?
This is where Chavan's framework provides such an elegant mechanical solution. UED states that photons do not exist as traveling entities. Instead, light is a field-to-field alignment event. It's a handshake between disturbed stillness at the source, like the sun, and receptive readiness at the destination, which is your eye.
Wait, so if the speed of light is just the processing limit of the field, that means light isn't a traveler fighting its way through empty space. The speed of light is literally just the universal buffering speed.
That is exactly it. It's the hardware processing limit of the SVE. The speed limit isn't about how fast a physical particle can fly through a vacuum. It's about the maximum rate at which the structured vacuum can process and align tension from node to node.
Oh, wow.
Nothing traveled from the sun to your eye. The tension simply rippled through the structure at its maximum allowed rate, and the handshake was completed.
Okay, that completely reframes how I look at the night sky. But wait, if the universe's ultimate goal is just to, like, flatten out all these gradients, untie all the knots, and return to perfect tension-neutral stillness, why do we exist?
That is the ultimate question.
Right. Humans are practically vibrating with stress, movement, and energy. We seem like a complete violation of this rule. We don't want to be still.
And that paradox is the exact bridge into Chavan's manifesto on life. To understand why active, living beings exist in a universe that wants absolute stillness, we have to introduce the concept of delta.
Delta.
In UED, delta is defined as a sustained imbalance, and this is a massive paradigm shift. Life is not defined by biology or DNA or carbon molecules. Life is defined strictly by physics as a system that actively holds a delta within a narrow corridor.
A sustained imbalance. So life is literally the act of hoarding tension and refusing to let it flatten out.
Yes, nature wants the tension to resolve, to flatten, but a living system is a localized architecture that grabs that imbalance and actively sustains it, and it has to exist in that narrow corridor.
What happens if it leaves the corridor?
Well, if you have too little delta, you hit dead stability, total equilibrium, which mechanically means death. But on the other hand, if you gather too much delta, the imbalance overwhelms the system's structural integrity, which leads to catastrophic collapse.
So it's not like spinning plates where things just gently fall over if you mess up. It's more like a localized electrical grid. Life is the act of constantly pulling just enough current to keep the lights on and the machines running.
Right.
If you cut the power, you get dead stability, the lights go out. But if you pump 1,000,000 volts through a system designed for 100, the grid melts down entirely. You have to surf that exact right voltage.
That is a much more accurate metaphor, yeah. It requires continuous active management to hold that electrical arc steady. And this mechanical requirement leads to a really fascinating reinterpretation of our internal daily experiences. In this framework, human emotions are not abstract or mystical or purely psychological phenomena.
They're physics.
Yes, they are functional signatures, basically mechanical dashboard signals of how your system is managing its internal delta.
Okay, so if my body is the electrical grid, my emotions are the voltage meters. The sources talk about love as a stabilizing force, right? It structurally aligns multiple systems like you and your family or a community to reduce internal friction. You share the tension load so the larger system can sustain its delta more efficiently.
Exactly. Love is essentially mechanical efficiency in a shared field.
Okay, so if love is the system finding stability and reducing internal friction, fear must be the dashboard light flashing bright red. It's the system realizing it's carrying way too much tension, the voltage is spiking, and it's about to break apart and collapse.
That is a perfect deduction.
Yeah.
Yeah, fear flares up when your system detects a threat that might push your delta beyond that narrow corridor. It is literally your structural engine screaming, "Warning! Imbalance exceeding structural limits." And that forces you to alter your behavior to drop the tension.
And what a desire, like my desire to get a promotion at work, or honestly, even just my desire for a cup of coffee in the morning.
Desire is the system seeking continuity through expansion. Your system recognizes that to keep the grid running tomorrow, it needs to pull forward new energy, new tension. Desire is future-oriented delta.
Which naturally brings us to the ultimate manager of all this tension, the human brain. If my emotions are just mechanical signals, what exactly is my mind doing?
The mind is reframed here as a delta engine, and consciousness is a field-based awareness loop. The mind's entire job is to amplify, circulate, and sometimes deliberately trap delta. It processes these imbalances to keep you in that narrow corridor.
This completely rewrites how we view mental health.
It really does.
Because if the mind is just a delta engine, then struggling with mental health isn't some sort of psychological failure or character flaw. Like, I look at my own anxiety or the anxiety so many people feel today. The sources actually define anxiety as future delta overload.
Yes, exactly. Your mind is attempting to process massive amounts of projected tension. It is running simulations of future problems, financial stress, social threats, physical dangers. But it is pulling all that simulated future tension into your current structural reality.
Wow.
The engine is literally redlining because the simulated imbalance far exceeds your current capacity to resolve it.
It just completely removes the moral shame from mental health. It's not a weakness. It is literally a biological engine trying to process a simulated physics problem and overheating.
It's pure structural gradient competition.
Yeah.
And depression, conversely, is defined as a low delta economy.
A low delta economy.
Yeah, the system senses that resolving tension in the current environment is just too structurally expensive. The voltage is too low to power the big drives. So the system deliberately collapses its own gradients to save energy. It flattens out, reducing desire and activity just to survive. It is a strictly mechanical adaptation.
That is a profound reframing. It takes the heavy, chaotic, emotional weight of being human and translates it into the elegant, predictable mechanics of a system desperately trying to sustain itself.
Exactly.
And it seems like every action this engine takes leaves a mark, which brings up Chavan's law of consequence. Now, this reads a lot like the concept of karma, but stripped of all the mysticism.
It basically is karma, but grounded strictly in field mechanics. The SVE, the universe, does not have a moral compass. It does not judge you. But it does register you. Every thought you have, every anxiety you process, every action you take creates a ripple of tension. The SVE acts as a mechanical field memory. It is an automatic structural record of ripples seeking resolution.
So there's no cosmic judge tallying up good or bad points. The field just physically remembers the tension you put into it. If you constantly pump chaotic, destructive tension into the grid, the field holds that gradient, and eventually that tension has to mechanically resolve.
Precisely. Consequence is just the physics of the field balancing its ledger. And this mechanical ledger scales up perfectly because think about it. What happens when you combine 8 billion of these individual delta engines, 8 billion human beings onto one planet?
Right, that brings us to our final act here. Zooming out from the individual mind to global geopolitics, how does UED handle human society?
This is where we see the absolute scale invariance of the theory. The exact same rules governing localized SVE knots like quarks and biological cells also govern entire societies and empires. Power in the human world is simply delta control.
Delta control. So whoever controls the flow of imbalance controls the power.
Yes. Institutions, governments, economies, they exist purely to maintain and manage power gradients. They organize mass human tension, social conflict, wars, political movements. These are not just clashes of ideas. They are essentially multi-scale delta warfare.
Multi-scale delta warfare.
Right. You have massive, complex systems competing to resolve their internal tension at the expense of others, or violently trying to force other systems to carry the weight of their imbalance.
That makes history look less like a series of deliberate human choices and more like, I don't know, fluid dynamics?
Yeah.
Just massive pressure systems colliding and resolving. And the sources introduce a really vital constant here called ATT.
Right. ATT stands for alignment threshold time. It is a fundamental constant in UED that predicts the breaking point. It maps when any system can no longer buffer its stress and must undergo a forced structural correction.
When you say any system, you mean that scale and variance again.
Exactly. A stressed biological cell, a dying star running out of fuel, or an unstable society crippled by inequality. When a system holds too much delta for too long, it hits its ATT. The buffer fails, the threshold is crossed, and the tension forcibly and violently resolves itself.
So when a massive empire suddenly collapses seemingly overnight, it's not just a historical accident, it's an electrical grid experiencing a catastrophic brownout.
Exactly.
Too many nodes pulled power at once, the imbalance hit the ATT, and the universe basically forces a violent system reset to prevent a total structural meltdown. Nature doesn't care if the empire was a democracy or a dictatorship. It only cared that the systems held in balance became too structurally expensive to maintain.
That is exactly how UED views history. The ATT is reached, the grid drops, and the SVE enforces a return to a lower tension state.
But if the universe is just cold mechanics enforcing tension limits, where do human morals fit in? Why do we care about being good?
Under UED, morality and ethics are reframed. They are not divine ideologies handed down from above. They are social delta stabilizers.
Social delta stabilizers.
Yeah, they are evolutionary mechanical rules we developed to prevent chaotic collapse. Concepts like do not steal, do not kill, or act with justice are basically load balancing algorithms. They prevent violent delta spikes within a community, keeping the societal grid safely away from its ATT so the system can survive.
Wow. Okay. We have covered an immense amount of ground today, and we've completely dismantled reality to do it. I mean, we started by plunging into the perfect, omnipresent stillness of the SVE, erasing the 400-year-old myth that anything in the universe actually physically moves.
We replaced physical motion with the law of ripple consequence, the idea that you are a consequence map, experiencing the sequential alignment of tension.
And we watched the physical primitives fall away as mere illusions. Time became a buffering delay called resolution duration. Gravity became a gradient of least resistance. Particles became persistent knots of tension, and light became a processing handshake across the field. Then we scaled up to life itself.
Redefining biology not as matter, but as the active maintenance of a sustained imbalance, a delta surfing that narrow corridor between dead stability and catastrophic collapse.
We saw how the mind functions as a delta engine, processing emotional signals like fear and love as mechanical dashboard warnings, all while the SVE acts as a flawless mechanical field memory, automatically recording every consequence.
And finally, we saw how billions of these engines form societies governed by delta control, ultimately subject to the absolute breaking point of ATT. It is a staggering, unified way to view existence.
It strips away a lot of the magic, the mysticism, the ego of being human, but it replaces it with this incredible interconnected elegance. You are not a solitary object fighting against a chaotic void.
You are an active, vibrating architecture of tension, embedded perfectly within a beautifully still universe.
Every interaction you have, every sight you see, is a handshade of alignment with the world around you. Which really brings us back to that dark highway at night. The roar of the wind, the certainty of speed, the blur of the road, it feels so incredibly real. But if you accept this framework, if the universe is a perfectly still, highly structured memory bank, and every thought, emotion, and action you have is a ripple that leaves a permanent structural record in the SVE, what unseen architecture are your daily habits quietly building or destroying in the stillness around you right now?
A question definitely worth holding on to.
Thanks for taking the deep dive with us.